Welcome to the massive open online course on Political Economy 1. In today's module, we are going to discuss women, labor markets, and social justice. The basic objective of this module are as follows. We are going to analyze the female labor market and also the gender differences in the labor market that has arisen in most of the countries of the world. Here we introduce a new sort of measure which is called the job gap and how all the above impacts the concept of social justice. And lastly, we discuss the Asia-Pacific countries mainly from the lens of care work. Now we all know that eradication of poverty, which is based on social development, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, environmental protection and social justice, this requires full participation from women in both political, economic and social decision making. So, women need to have autonomy and control over their lives and also their bodies. So, women's labor force participation is an important measure of social and economic well-being, with conditions such as fair wages, safe working conditions, opportunities for training and advancement, the right to organize and bargain collectively. Paid employment helps the women to achieve economic independence, enhance their social agency, and also their social mobility, and in turn leads to empowerment. Despite important gains in women's rights and gender equality, significant barriers to fuller realization of women's economic, social, political, and cultural rights are still needed. Women are still overrepresented in informal and precarious work arrangements, including at the bottom of the global supply chains, which now command around 60% of global production, transport, and services. So when we look at it from the lens of gender, we find that occupational segregation, undervaluation of work in the female-dominated sectors persist. And along with that, a resultant gender wage and pension gaps also remain. So discrimination is based not only on gender, but also based on class, race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation and identity, disability, HIV status, indigenous and migration status. They still pervade our experience in the world of work and our access to opportunities. So social and economic justice for women essentially means transforming women's work. And we will not be able to give social justice to women without a transformation in the way we view and value care. If we cannot bring about any transformation in this sphere, then it would be very difficult for us to ensure social justice for women. We all know that care is essential to our well-being and development as human beings. Without care, we cannot survive and we cannot thrive also. But when unpaid care work in the home falls primarily on women, on our mothers, on our sisters, it can limit our choices and opportunities for other activities. Areas of paid work for these women, education, leisure activities, all of them are severely compromised because of the care work that women have to take at homes. And before I proceed further, I would like to mention another very important thing, that this care work that women do at home is such a taken for granted phenomena that even women themselves fail to take notice of the fact that they are burdening a huge responsibility without being paid for it, and at the same time they're sacrificing their own ambition and aspiration for this. So we now look at how to analyze the female labor market. We first try to look into the indicators that measures the labor utilization. A person in the labor force is somehow engaged in economic activity. Either they are working or they are looking for work. Basically, the labor force is a sum of both employment and unemployment. So as a concept, the labor force has come to represent the productive potential of the people in an economy, with the segment that is employed representing the labor that is utilized, and the segment that is unemployed represents the underutilized labor. So a person who is inactive is basically the inverse of this. So he is basically outside the labor force. He is neither working and he is neither looking for work. So if we try to define labor force participation rate, the labor force as a percentage of the working age population, that will be the definition of the labor force participation rate. So it represents the share of the productive potential in the working age population, that is the share of the population that could be tapped for economic engagement. If we look at this chart in the screen, I have taken it from the ILO Trained Econometric Models of November 2009. This shows the global distribution of female and male working age population by main economic status. Here the deep brown color indicates employed. So in the case of female, we find that 48% are employed, that is their labor has been utilized, while male, huge amount, that's around 72.8% are brown in color, that means they're employed. But if we look at this very pale region, that means this is the inactive portion. This inactive portion of female is 48.8. That means they are not at all in the labor force. It is around 48.8. In the context of male, it's just half. It is around 22.3. And unemployed for females is 3.6 and for male is 4.9. So you can see that the unemployment figures are quite similar. So if we look at that chart that I have just explained, we find that the gender differences are immediately evident that represent the global working age population. The overall picture of the global capacity to tap the productive potential of its people is one in which nearly half, that is around 48.4% of the productive population of the females remains untapped compared to around 22.3% of the men. So can you just imagine how much could have been added to the global economic growth if the share of active female population could have increased by even a 5 percentage points over the next few years. Of course, certain regions are definitely doing better than others when it comes to female economic utilization, like in the Middle East, in the North Africa and South Asia. We find that more than 6 in 10 women of working age, they remain outside the labor force. That means they do not show any interest in working. If we give these women a chance to contribute to the economic welfare of themselves and their families through labor force engagement, this obviously is going to bring an overall development to the whole economy. And it will certainly be a first step in building a society which is based on gender justice. If we look at the latest figures, then we can say that the global unemployment rate stands at around 5.8% in 2022. Of course, this unemployment rate is below the average rate in the 2 decades before the pandemic. And it is projected to remain at this level also in the whole of 2023. Moreover, the picture does not change much when we disaggregate this unemployment rate by gender as also by the country income group. Estimates range from 4.3% for men in high income countries to around 6.2% for women in the lower middle income countries, and this is obviously a very fairly a modest gap. Although the unemployment rate that I am talking about is a highly valuable labor market measure, but it is also a very restrictive measure, because we cannot conclude from unemployment estimates that women and men face the same level of difficulties when they enter the job market or while they are searching for jobs. So to be considered unemployment, it is not enough to be jobless and to have an interest in working. An unemployed person must be looking for job recently and must be available to take up a job at a very short notice, typically say within 7 days. This criteria we know is very less likely to be met by women because of their disproportionate involvement in the care work in their households. So these activities, the care work that I'm talking about, they can leave little time for job search, and 1 week, 7 days is a very short time to arrange any sort of alternative care facilities for the elderly or for the children in their households. Next, we come to a new measure that has been developed by ILO, the International Labour Organization. The ILO has developed this new indicator, and this is called the job gap. This captures all persons who would like to work but do not have a job. In 2022, the global job gap stood at around 473 million people, while the unemployment headcount was only 205 million people. We have double of that, more than double of that is a job gap. So this equates to a job gap rate of around 12.3%, which represents a share of those who would like to work but they are jobless. Here again I have a chart to show you this. This is from the ILO stat. It's an ILO modeled estimates database. It shows the unemployment rate and the jobs gap of 2022 by gender and country income group. The blue columns here shows us the unemployment rate, while the jobs gap column is shown by the yellow columns. Now, in the first instance, we have the difference, that is women minus men. So if I have anything in positive column, it essentially means that women minus men, that means women unemployment rate is high or the job gap of women are high. So for the high income countries, I find that there is some sort of positive gap, positive column, while job gap is also there. For the upper middle income countries, the job gap rises. For the lower middle income countries, the job gap rises further, while for the low income countries, the job gap rises the furthest. This is in terms of difference, that is women minus men. If I look only at men, I find that again in the low income country, the job gap is huge as compared to the unemployment rate, while I find the unemployment rate for men much higher in the upper middle income and in the lower middle income countries. If we look at women, again, the amount of job gap is around 25% in the low income countries, and it is predominantly lower in the high income country at less than 10%. While if I look the unemployment rates, they more or less range between a little below 5% to a little above 5% for all the country groups. So here we can say that there is a uniformity in the unemployment rates with noticeable but yes very minor variations across groups. But there is a wide variation in the job gaps. So this is something to really note. And this variability presents a clear trend in terms of gender and in terms of the level of economic development of those countries. The smallest job gap are found in the high-income countries, with men registering a rate of around 7.4% and women registering a rate of around 9.6%. So this difference is the smallest. However, as national income decreases, that means as I move from high-income countries to middle-income and low-income countries, we find that the job gap increases, as does the gap between the gender, the men and the women. Overall, the estimates point to severe difficulties faced by women in finding a job, particularly in the least developed countries. Till now, we were focusing on gender gap in employment. But let us look at the gender gap in earnings. And this is measured by differences in labor income. Now, what is labor income? Labor income is the amount that employed persons earn by working. We can have capital income. What is capital income? If I own any sort of capital and if I rent it out, whatever income that I get, that will be capital income. Labor is also another form of factor of production. Here also the results are worrying. In 2019, for each dollar men earned in labor income, women earned only 51 cents world over. So in case of labor income, analyzing data separately by income group is particularly useful, as richer countries heavily influence the global estimates. In low and lower middle income countries, the gender disparity in labor income is sizably worse. So if men in these low income countries are earning $1, women are earning only 33 cents. While in lower middle income countries, if men are earning $1, women are earning only 29 cents. In high income and upper middle income countries, this value is around 58 and 56 cents respectively for every $1 earned by men. So this is something which is really worrying. So if a man is earning $1 overall in the whole world, if we do not disaggregate even with the country income group, we find that a woman is earning only 51 cents, and it gets much more worse in the less developed economies or in the lower income economies, where a woman is earning only 29 cents given a man's income of $1. Now, the rates of unemployment, this needs to be complemented with broader measure of labor underutilization. Although this phenomenon was already well established, the magnitudes were not well known. And the global unemployment rates for men and women are practically identical. Whereas the new broader measure of underutilization, that is a job gap that we are talking about here, shows a much larger gender gap in access to employment. The highest gaps are obviously found in the developing world. The job gaps indicator quantifies the most urgent need for employment creation. Globally, women of working age are employed at approximately 2/3 of the rate of the working age of men. Even closing the gender imbalances in the jobs gap would not suffice to achieve equal employment rates, as women express less interest than men in employment. Nonetheless, if we need to address this problem that 15% of the working age women would like to work but do not have a job, this constitutes really a very urgent policy need and a major opportunity to increase the contribution of workers to the common well-being of the economies. As I have said, here comes the question of justice. As the new labor income estimates by gender forcefully show that tackling the gender gap in employment opportunities alone is not sufficient. Gender imbalances in quality of employment skew the distribution of earnings again in favor of men. Even if women and men worked at the exact same rate, a massive and unfortunately unrealistic shift, let us just assume this, women would still earn between 43 and 73 cents per $1 earned by men, depending on the income group. So rates of participation in employment are unequal to begin with, and the pay gaps continue to compound these unemployment gaps. So globally, for each dollar men receives in labor income, women receives only 51 cents. And in the developing world, the differences are exacerbated, with women earning only 29 and 33 cents on dollar in lower middle income and in the low income countries. Now, these estimates shine light on the magnitude of gender disparities in labor markets, underscoring how important it is to enhance the women's overall participation in employment, to expand their access to employment across occupations, and to address the glaring gaps that is there in job qualities that are faced by women. So, to elucidate my points further, we will take a specific case of the Asia-Pacific region. Here, the female labor force participation has decreased by nearly 10 percentage points between 1990 and 2021. The latest data show that labor force participation of women of 25 years of age and older is around 48.5% compared to 83.5% amongst men of the same age group. Yet approximately 64% of women workers in Asia and the Pacific region are employed in the informal sector, which leaves them lowly paid, highly vulnerable jobs and absolutely no form of social protection for them. Again, I come to the same point that women's engagement in the labor market in both the formal and the informal sector, they overlap with their care responsibilities. In Asia and the Pacific region, the time that women spend in paid and unpaid care and domestic work is the highest amongst all the regions in the world, and that is why specifically I have taken up this case. In contrast to men, women spend 4 times more than men in unpaid care and domestic work, and they have to also combine paid work with a disproportionate burden of unpaid care work. An estimated $3.8 billion could be added to the economy if the unpaid care and domestic work of women were added to the GDP measurements of the Asia and the Pacific region. So given the persistence of gender roles and social norms, women not only bear the greater load of unpaid care and domestic work, but they are also predicted to limit their labor force participation because of this. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, women have been positioned in a more vulnerable situation as compared to men. It has been especially critical for those working in the informal sectors and in sectors which are overrepresented by women, like the frontline healthcare workers, domestic workers, services, hospitality, education and retail industries, which have faced the brunt of the COVID-19, the more risks and vulnerability of the pandemic. The pandemic has exacerbated traditional gender roles and increased women's time allocation on household chores such as cleaning, cooking, caring for the elderly, homeschooling children, etc. So many of the gender inequalities which existed even before the pandemic, it has been further deepened. So now, instead of moving into improvements, we are moving against the tide after the pandemic. Women are now in a much more vulnerable position as compared to before. The often overlooked socio-economic value of unpaid care work has gained attention in the recovery responses and moved to center stage in global policy agenda because of this. Because people are repeatedly saying this, that how much burden can a woman take? One of the key sources of inequality between men and women participation is the amount of time that women are allocating to unpaid care work and domestic services. And of course, women are left with less time for labor market activities because of this. And the gender division of unpaid care work determines the quantity and quality of women's paid employment, and this is one of the main reasons why women are outside the labor force. In Asia and Pacific, around 400 million women, or 52.64% of the 770 million inactive women belonging to the working age population, stay out of the labor force. And what is the reason that they cite? They cite unpaid care responsibility for which they are staying out of the labor market. In contrast, how many men do that? Only around 7.88% men. They stay out of the labor force for this same reason. So there is variations in the pattern of time allocation in unpaid care work. Among women themselves, some who are, say, mostly migrants or women who are living in the rural areas, they spend significantly more time in unpaid care work than others. So this depends on the disadvantages that they are facing in terms of class, race, location, etc. This is even worse for women living in poverty, who are required to perform the unpaid care and domestic work and also perform paid work under precarious circumstances. The wealthier people are, the more financial means a household spend to buy goods such as processed food, prepared fuel, and labor service devices and care-related responsibilities. They can afford that, but the poor people cannot afford that. So if a household cannot afford to pay for goods and services in addition to working long hours, women has to engage in production of these goods and services themselves. So as a result, women who are working in paid job are commonly said to work a second shift or experience a double day. One, they are working outside, they are earning for their family, and secondly, they are working at home. And so it's a second shift or a double day for women, every woman in our society who are working. So globally, when women and men finish school and start working, they tend to be paid equally. A gender pay gap soon appears and grows significantly over the next 2 decades of their lives. The significant proportion of the gender pay gap for women with children has been commonly referred to as the motherhood pay gap, because they have to take care of the children, and that is why that's a penalty for them. And so we call it the motherhood pay gap. It refers to the pay gap between the mothers and the non-mothers. The so-called motherhood penalty describes the problem that women face in the labor force when having children due to biased views of mothers as being less productive or stereotypical hiring and promotion decisions that penalize the career of the mothers, labor market interruptions or reduction in working hours, and employment in family-friendly jobs with flexible working hours, which obviously are low paying. Nowadays, of course, I hear that in China, to help bring about a boom in babies, they have tried a scheme of incentivizing women who want to be mothers. So now we are having the other way around in China. Now, especially women with young children are less likely to be employed, work in managerial or leadership positions, and suffer a wage penalty compared to women without children. In Indonesia, for example, while young single women aged 15 to 24 years have the highest rate of economic participation, the biggest drop in the labor force is seen just after marriage in anticipation of having children. So, women with children not only experience additional disadvantages in the labor force market as compared to women without children, but also in contrast to men with children. Men with children in the society have a high employment to population and are often offered higher salaries than men without children. And this trend, which is totally opposite to motherhood penalty, is known as fatherhood bonus. So fathers with children gets more wages as compared with mothers with children. So mother with children are facing discrimination with respect to other women without children, and they're also facing discrimination also with fathers who are having children. So evidence that mothers suffer wage penalty over and above the penalty for being a woman raises concern not only for gender equality but also for the capacity of societies to manage a sustainable balance between their economic aims of active female participation in paid work and the social aims of a fair distribution of income to support the reproduction and nurture of children. Caring and nurturing of children, these are not unique women's responsibilities. These responsibilities should be shared equally between men and women, but also guaranteed through care-related policies in societies to ensure women's equal participation in the labor force. So, I would like to put forth certain policy recommendations. So, countries in the region, they should promote female labor participation by focusing on the care economy, and mainly in the following domains. They should ensure women's participation in formation, implementation, monitoring and evaluation of policies and plans, which should include women in the decision-making process, so that labor practices, minimum wages, and other social protection legislation can take women's situations into account and protect their rights and needs. Their outcomes should be monitored of the implementation of such care-related policies to ensure that the rights and benefits are made available to all women. Care-related policies should be developed due to the emphasis on care provision for children and older persons. Care disability policies are mostly overlooked. The preponderance of children and older persons who require care for limited periods possibly obscures the specific needs of persons with disabilities. Some people with disability require care or assistance throughout their lives, and the assistance they get comes mainly from the family members. To advance equal opportunities for caregivers and care-dependent persons, countries need to attend to these vulnerable groups like the disabled people who need care continuously. We also need to promote a flexible work-life balanced arrangement. The public and the private sectors must collaborate to remove barriers to women's work by providing flexible work arrangements. Efforts should be done to change the gender bias and the stereotypes, like the points that I talked about, the motherhood penalty and the undervalue of highly feminized occupations. We should promote labor force and time use surveys. And also, occupational segregation should also be addressed, and we also should support working women with children. We need to promote entrepreneurial training and credit facilities, and also invoke different national agencies, non-profit organizations, and stakeholders. So to conclude, we should say that despite the increment of opportunities for women to participate in the labor market in Asia and the Pacific region, the lack of adequate care-related protection is largely based on the assumption that family members, mainly women and girls, will provide care services for free. In doing so, by reinforcing care work as women's primary responsibility, women are forced to reduce their participation in the paid workforce or adapt their paid work to unpaid care work. By distinguishing the care economy as crucial to promoting women's labor participation, it extends beyond unpaid care work. It also comprises the imperative to formalize and promote quality paid care work in critical sectors such as healthcare, education, and domestic work. This is crucially important in contexts where there is a growing informal market for care, where female migrant workers work in precarious conditions, and where legislations, labor, and social protection do not include their work as equally valuable. Inequalities in unpaid care work and inequalities in the labor market are deeply interrelated. Addressing and valuing unpaid care and domestic care work is key to unlocking the potential of women and girls. And if I'm permitted to say at this point that we cannot look up to governments or organizations for any such policies, it has to begin at our own homes, where equality, doing unpaid care work, has to be shared equally by all the male and female members at home. Then only can we free the women and girls in our families to enter the labor market and perform their ambitions, aspirations, and also their productivity.